Welcome to Building Innovation, the podcast, convening experts to discuss issues and solutions.
Hey, welcome everybody to another episode of Building Innovation, the podcast. So glad that you're here with us today, and what a treat. We have with us today Mr. Kimon Onuma, who is a legend in the industry and an innovator I've known for probably a decade. And if you want to know what is happening in this industry technologically, it's always great to have a conversation with Kimon. He's a wealth of knowledge, and we are fortunate enough today, and he has stopped by the podcast to give us some insights on emerging technologies and what's going on in the industry. Kimon, welcome. Thank you so much for all of your contributions to NIBS over the years and being a friend and colleague, and so glad to have you here on the podcast.
Thank you, Johnny. I'm excited to be here. And it's been, I think, over 16 years with NIBS that I had something going on. And it got me with the building and the science. When I heard those two words together, I go, wow, that's interesting. And it went from there.
Well, you outdate me in terms of NIBS years for sure. I've been involved in a little over a decade, but yeah, 16 years is a long stretch. I know you've been involved in a lot of work with NIBS over the years. Is there any you want to touch on? Any initiatives or standards that you were involved in that you want to highlight?
Oh, yeah, all the way back from the development of NBIMS, the early versions, a lot of the interactions and brainstorming with the different agencies, the collaboration with other colleagues that are doing similar things to us. So it's been so many different experiences, and it just continues. And now with the work that we're doing right now with through NIBS with the State Department, it's also very exciting to be able to help on that.
Yeah, I remember one of my first working scenarios with you. We were both working on the rewrite of the VA BIM guide several years ago, and you were working on some things related to BIM, or building information management components that went into some of the VA facilities. So I had the pleasure of working with you in multiple capacities. But I don't want to. Even though I think most of our audience has heard of you, because again, I think you're a bit of a legend in the industry, we do want to take an opportunity to have a more proper introduction. So let's just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, and share something a little bit with our audience here.
Yeah, I'm an architect. Been using BIM since the early 90s. My father had an U.S.-owned architectural firm in Japan, working a lot with the Corps of Engineers, a lot of government facilities in the Far East. That's where I got my experience there. I have my own firm now. It's Onuma Inc. We're still architects, but we're also software developers. We build our own BIM applications on the web, and we do a lot of consulting with agencies and owners. And we're constantly looking for things that are coming up in the future. That's been our pattern for years and years. We're looking ahead because we're interested, but we also know that it can bring value to us and the people that we work with.
Yeah, and you're a true thought leader in the organization. I do, recall several years ago as a volunteer, you were leading one of our work groups, and I think it was the thought leadership work group. And I was impressed even many years ago about your ability to bring a lot of people together to the table and discuss these topics, even as they're emerging, as people are struggling to wrap their heads around this technology. You have a great skill of coalescing the ideas and making them meaningful. So thank you for, on behalf of NIBS, thank you for all of your effort and contributions over the years. Just want to talk real briefly. Right now, you're part of a rather new effort, and in 2023 developed or launched rather the Digital Twin Integration Subcommittee, and you're a part of that. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you're doing there?
Yeah, it's a really exciting initiative to look at building information modeling management and digital twins and how they can intersect and collaborate or complement, whatever the right word is. And it's pretty exciting for me because from the BIM side, I've been involved for many years, and we look at standards and structure, and obviously for design and construction, we have a wealth of knowledge on that. On the digital twin side, it touches a lot of other domains and industries and the capabilities that they have there. And the main thing about digital twins, it starts connecting the nodes. It starts taking complexity, first of all, and breaking it down into pieces that can then be reconnected to create new value. So for example, if you have the design and construction of a building is one thing, right? One use. And then on the digital twin side, you want to maintain and manage that building, and you want to track the condition of the spaces and the roof and the equipment and computerized maintenance management system. There's so many different uses there, and it seems too complex to be able to solve it all. But from a digital twin perspective, it's using the value of the data that's in BIM to create value for the digital twin that is then useful for many different end users, owners, occupants, other industries. And that part excites me because it cuts across a lot of these silos that we've been talking about for years.
Yeah, I remember, Kimon, just several years ago, I think one of your presentations, I don't remember what conference it was that I was at, but I do remember several years ago, you mentioning the concept of decoupled data, and that is just one of those things that really stuck with me. I'm like, I totally get it, maybe you could share with our audience, where how that idea evolved and why it's so important. I guess why is it so important that we have decoupled data?
Yeah, that's a great question. And for us, how it evolved, and it's not something we invented. We just realized that that's how. For example, when you build applications, you want to be able to get to data to build an application, right? In the traditional software world from years ago, and maybe even some today, the data is basically baked into the application. You have to buy that application to do A, and you have to buy another application to do B, and they both have data that might be shared. If you decouple the data, there's many different levels of it that you can share it in a way that the other application can use, or you decouple it completely. In other words, you take the information and you put it into a server, whether it's a data lake or whatever it's called, common data environment, and you can tap into it. And the way I describe it is if you imagine a Lego set and you have, let's talk about a toy first, a Star Wars Millennium Falcon that's made out of steel and plastic and looks great when it's new. And then over the years, it starts falling apart and things start falling off and then it doesn't work anymore and then you just throw it away. Now imagine a Millennium Falcon that's made out of Legos that you can then, when things start falling apart or you get tired of it, you can decouple the Legos and build a new toy. The instructions are in the Lego, they're easy to use, and you can build new value from it. Think of data in those terms too, that you can repurpose it and compose it in different ways. In the digital twin world, it's called composable, where basically you can take Lego A and Lego B and create a new, completely new use that didn't exist before. And that part's exciting because it's basically endless after that. And that's how you can also solve the complexity of our industry and our world. You really have to be able to build things on the fly, and thinking in terms of the mobile devices that we have, our iPhones and our Android devices. That's essentially how these apps are just proliferating because it's easy to build new functionality on data that's shared without having to rebuild the whole stack of information. For example, maps are available, so you don't have to build maps and satellites to create maps. You can just use the maps in an app.
Yeah, that is a great analogy. You had me at Millennium Falcon, by the way. I think Star Wars was one of the first movies I ever saw in a theater, actually. So you mentioned this. You talk about the data, and I love the analogy of Legos because it does really paint a great picture. And you're a great storyteller, by the way. Come on, I really appreciate the analogies that you give us. And you mentioned, being able to move the data around in the different applications, and that is what I hear in this industry. I want to talk for just a minute about challenges, opportunities, and solutions. And one of the things that I hear repeatedly is the complex tech stack that companies and organizations are really having to deal with. I have heard presentation after presentation about AE firms or general contractors that have tried to overcome the complexity of their tech stack or their app. There's so many applications that they have to have, I guess, because of the lack of decoupled data is part of it. Can you talk a little bit about that challenge and what some opportunities are and some solutions?
Yeah, definitely. And it's going to be a hybrid environment. It's not like we're going to flip a switch and everything's going to be decoupled, right? So we have, and the tightly bound applications that have existed for a long time, they exist like that they've been built like that over the years because that used to be the only way to build it. You had to build everything, right? The data, the interface, whatever. That's one from a technical perspective, but there's also a business angle to it that if you build it in a way that you have to buy that application, then you all of a sudden are locked into that tool, your data, your license, everything. And in some cases that might be okay, but if the owners of the consumers of the application start asking the developers side, hey, we like your application, but we also want to be able to move the data out of it in a neutral format, which is where open standards comes in, right? We want to move our data out of application A and move it into application B. Open standards lets us do that. The next step is if you decouple it, you don't even have to export it and import it. You're using the same source data in real time at set intervals. It's not always real time, but it could be 15 minutes, whatever. But basically, you're sharing the same source information. So the single source of truth that can be in many different places, depending on the type of data you're looking for. So for example, a human resources database might have information about the people in the building. And in theory, you can take the names of the people in the building and put it into a BIM application, see who's sitting at that desk, but it wouldn't make sense. You want to find the source and say, well, we designed a building, who's sitting in this desk? And if that human resources data changes, then you would have a different person sitting at the desk. So there's an opportunity to use the existing infrastructure and existing applications, but also demand for open standards, accessible open data, first of all, before even open standards. How do I get to the data? Can I get it in and out? Open standards if it exists, and the longer term, not longer term, even shorter term, because decoupled data is nothing new. It's already out there. Technically, it's already possible. And we can have a hybrid environment. That's where the digital twin comes in. If you have digital twins and define what type of data and how the access works, then you can start understanding what the constraints are and how you build solutions for yourself. And as far as companies being able to deal with this, yes, it's a complex thing, but you can do it a piece at a time, and it doesn't have to be overburdened. You don't have to overburden yourself. You have to kind of break it down into chunks and start solving it one at a time.
Yeah, you've mentioned a lot of things here in the decoupled data. It sounds like that the Lego, that interchangeable format is the foundational piece. But you also mentioned digital twins, and so you need, if I'm hearing you correctly, you need that foundational piece to be able to plug in, to the different applications or the different use cases. And you and I have talked a fair amount about AI as well, so I'm going to inject that into our conversation. So, for someone that's just trying to wrap their head around these multiple pieces and of technology, digital twins, AI, machine learning, all these different pieces, can you help our audience rationalize, how these pieces connect? What kind of future is it painting?
Yeah, that could be a short answer or a very long answer to that. But the AI is really interesting to us because before AI came along, we had data. Let's just not even talk about decoupled data, but we had a knowledge base, let's say, rules about how you design a hospital or a school or whatever. How many square feet, how many students, all that stuff that we do as architects and engineers. What's the span, what's the load, all that stuff. You can turn that into data, right? And when I say data, it could even be a spreadsheet. In our world, a spreadsheet is a form of data, right? It's a table, structured information about here are the spans of a truss, right? You can capture that. And you can build rules around that, and you can just have a spreadsheet that generates output, right? And we've been doing that for years, right? Using spreadsheets and databases to kind of set up these very simple calculations. When you start layering and then if you progress further than that and you start adding digital twins and more sophisticated tools like BIM that create relationships between here's the truss span and here's the building, and the building is located here with a snow load of this and whatever, you start needing to connect the different relational rules. And that's where the complexity starts kicking in, right? Because we as we all know in the building industry, buildings are really complex. There's a lot of stuff happening. There's a lot of contractual and legal things, and there's a lot of competing interests. So you need people that are smart to be able to put that building together and look in on the decisions that are being made. But the complexity is just exploding because there's so much information and data that you can't have enough people to look at everything. With AI, the opportunity that we're seeing is that you can put an AI as an agent, just like another person that's looking into the data and say, watch this design as it's happening and flag things that are going out of range. It could be a very simple rule, or it could get more complex and even ask questions that you wouldn't even imagine asking a typical team, but AI can actually look and give you insights and value that are not possible just with the human capability and the tools that we have. So that's the opportunity that I see with all of these things coming together. And one last thing, if I put decoupled back into it, if you have decoupled data, it means that humans can get to it, but also AI can get to it as well too. That's a critical piece.
So one of the things that's very interesting to me is how you've described AI as an additional team member, which is I think a very interesting concept, because there's certainly work that artificial intelligence can do and can streamline, for the built environment. I was talking to a structural engineer earlier, and he was talking about how AI could work within structural design. Now, your background as an architect, it's engineering, based on a set of rules. It's a little bit different design than the aesthetics of architectural design to some degree. But can you talk about, from an architect perspective, how you see some of this technology really being applied?
Yeah, definitely. And the AI, as another team member, it doesn't even have to be a single team member. It could be thousands, right? Thousands of little agents doing different things. As an architect, even before we even started talking about AI and decoupled data, for years we've been looking at how do we capture the rules in databases or spreadsheets, just an Excel file. What are the trusts that I talked about, or the program requirements of a building, or what goes into a healthcare facility, what type of equipment goes into it. Those are just rules that are just tables of data, and this is actually related to even a NIMS project. So we've been capturing those kind of rules for years, and as an architect, what we strive to do is automate as much as possible in the design process of the stuff that's mundane and not interesting to do, to be able to spend time on the value added, the fun stuff, the design, the stuff that humans are better at. So the spreadsheets and the rules and the algorithms that have been around for years, now you start adding AI into the mix. It means that we're going to be able to do more, create higher quality designs, collaborate better, take that curve of the building industry that's been flat for years and improve the efficiency, just like aerospace and manufacturing has done, that we have not yet done, right? We're starting to move in that direction, but there's still a lot more. That's what's, from an architect's perspective, that's why I see it exciting. I often bump into resistance to that concept because it seems like I'm automating design, which that's not the intent, although it is automating part of the design, but it's making it better overall from a design and planning perspective. I believe very strongly in this overall, and the collaboration aspect with others in the industry.
Yeah, I personally had about 20 years in AE firms, so I can relate to some of the mundane tasks, right? I completely relate to that. So that's a very interesting example of the spreadsheet and rules and connecting that database. I guess, what would you say to, some people might say, well, okay, well, that's Kimon Onuma, that's Onuma Inc., and they have these resources. They've been doing it for years, but I'm a small, medium business here, and I'm like, does this really apply to me, or is this something that's not going to impact me at all? What would you say to those who are coming from that perspective?
Absolutely. It applies to small and large businesses and even individuals. We are not a large organization. In fact, we've shrunk over the years. If I look 30, 40 years ago, my father's architectural firm in Japan used to be many more people. And intentionally over the years, we've focused in on having smaller teams that then you can plug in other specialists into. If you as an individual become good at all this technology, and it doesn't have to start complex. It looks complex, but you can really boil it down. If you go back to the Lego example, you can boil down to that piece that you're capable of doing. And the other thing is that the technologies are getting easier to acquire and even build on your own. That's another thing that AI actually can do. It can actually start writing programs if you wanted it to. But before even AI, the applications, for example, mobile apps that are on our mobile devices are incredibly powerful. And on the web too, they become much more easy to build. So for example, you can take a spreadsheet that I was describing earlier, literally take a spreadsheet, pull it into an app like Google Sheets, or there are other, Microsoft tools, whatever, and then use app builders that look at that spreadsheet, say, give me an app that does A, B, and C, a use case, and you can literally build it in minutes. There are tutorials on the web, and maybe this is another follow-on webinar that we need to do. How can I, as a small organization, use the knowledge and data that I already have? It might be proprietary to internal organization, or you might be collaborating, whatever, and turn that into an actionable tool that brings value to me and my clients.
Yeah, that's a great example. We've talked about some challenges and opportunities there, and then you've mentioned some solutions. We are in an information age where there are readily available resources for folks that want to learn this. But you've done some of these events over the years as well. I think that you've had several BIMStorms. Tell us a little bit about that. I don't know that our audience knows what those are and what they can expect if they wanted to participate in one.
Yeah, so BIMStorms, they've been going on for about 16 years. They're essentially an architectural charrette on steroids, kind of on the cloud and the web. The reason we started it 16 years ago is because of the type of work that we do for agencies, government agencies, or private industry. We can't share everything, right? But if we pull it into a neutral environment, create a hypothetical scenario and say, here are the pieces that we're dealing with, here are the tools that we know, who else has a solution that can plug into this? It's kind of a digital twin thing, right? You're creating nodes and creating an environment where people can test things. So we even started with the first BIMStorm was in Los Angeles 16 years ago, and we shrunk it down to 24 hours. What can we do in 24 hours around the world? We put it on the cloud and the web. We used some of our tools. We invited others, including potential competitors, in and said, plug in and show us what you can do with this. By doing that, we immediately are not talking about the potential or not looking at marketing material. We're actually seeing the solution. And it doesn't always work. That's also the good thing. It's a skunk works kind of thing. We're testing things and experimenting, but something comes out of it, and that becomes an aha moment. That becomes a value to the people that participate that you can take back into your organization. Or for us too, we've learned from it because we don't know everything. We're learning, constantly learning, and we've always felt that we have to constantly innovate to stay ahead of the curve in the technology, and that's what BIMStorms have been. So 16 years have been going on. We have one going on right now. There's one in a couple of weeks. If you go to BIMStorm.com, you can see what's going on, but we invite anybody to participate. And actually through NIBS, BIMStorms are even being used by some of the agencies like the State Department internally to help that foster the collaboration.
Yeah, that's amazing. Very cool. So I want to look at talk about some emerging technologies. We've been talking about emerging technologies the majority of our conversation here, but I want to dive into your frame of mind on emerging technologies. What are you tracking? Like, what is on your radar that you're like, oh, that's interesting, and I'm really going to watch to see how this developed. I'm just curious for the building industry. What are the things you're tracking and watching?
Yeah, this has been happening for years. Maybe I'll bring it back to NIBS. So what's exciting about the technology is this technology by itself is exciting, but in the digital twin discussions too, this is actually this front and center. It's the use cases. What's the specific use case for that technology? So the use case drives the need for the technology, and you can dream up anything as a use case. And NIBS certainly has a ton of them with the different councils and the whole building design guide over the years. If you take these use cases and with the simple to use apps that I'm talking about, you can say, hey, I have this need to be able to do whatever, A, B, and C, to track costs, to track whatever, to track energy. What solutions are there out there to do that? And the BIMStorm, for example, we've seen scenarios where we had blockchain, people that were very good at blockchain. I know very little about blockchain, but I know a little bit now, but back then, and even in this one that's coming up, they said, okay, if we tie a blockchain to the BIM, what can we do with it? And we experimented with that. That ability to kind of track these little Legos as they're moving around in the design and construction process, to be able to look at the simulated design, the prototype as it's called in digital twin world before the building is built, and looked at that simulation as it progresses through the design and compare it back to the client requirements or the industry standards or best practices or risks that have been identified. or things that have just come up on recently. Maybe there's something that comes up and says, well, maybe this material is dangerous to use or whatever. That ability for the data to talk to each other and to inform me as a designer to make a decision then from what I see in front of me versus just going on from my personal experience and understanding that's in my head. You're starting to tap into other knowledge bases. That's exciting, I think, and that can start solving a lot of the complexities and the challenges that we have in the industry.
Yeah, the collaborative approach of the BIMStorms, I mean, my experience is the more folks you can get to the table and talking and working on the problem, the better solution. Going back to the idea of AI and agents that have become a team member for specific tasks, that even enhances further the type of solutions that could be produced.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It's endless.
So what are some of the trends that you're noticing in the industry? Maybe trends of adoption, or and some people do they look at this and you see the buzzwords, right? So you'll see a
Mm-hmm.
buzzword of big data and it's there for a while, and then you see a different buzzword, and some people look at digital twins as a buzzword, and some people might even think that AI is just a
Mm-hmm.
buzzword. But
Yeah.
what are you seeing in terms of adoption? What are you seeing from your perspective in terms of trends that are happening in the industry? Is this a fad that's going to pass, or what's your take?
Yeah, the buzzword aspect of it, I think there is a lot of hype and marketing pitch out there, and for us too, we're very clear that we're heavily experimenting and using AI, but we don't have all the answers yet. But we know it's definitely going. The more that we work with it every day, the more it's going there. There's a lot of marketing hype to it, I think, so we have to kind of be aware of that. Um, the trends that I see, if we look outside of our industry, the blockchain connection that I mentioned earlier, but also we in one of the BIMStorms we got involved with was called Port Storm. They're looking at port design. How do you design containers and ships and cargo ships that move around? And you look at the tools that they're using. They're already using digital twins. For example, they have a rules, a business process model that says if a cargo ship comes in, we need this many cranes, and we need this, and we need that, we need this much energy to be able to offload that in 24 hours and move it around, and we need this infrastructure. And if something breaks in this business process model rule, it's going to affect our ability to deliver, right? So that process model is their capturing of their rules, but then they're taking that business process model, all the boxes that are connected with arrows and everything, and connecting it to their digital twin and interacting with it and simulating what will happen if this happens. And then when the cargo ship, the physical ship comes in, it's then using the same model to hit against that and say, here's what's going on. How do we optimize offloading, all that? We're expanding beyond that. They asked us, well, can we connect this into BIM as well, too, to be able to design a new terminal building? So those nodes, and you don't need to know, I don't need to know everything about port design and how cargo ships work. I just need to know where the touch points are that affect me if I'm designing the terminal building. How many cargo ships are there and how many terminals and computers do we need and how high does the view of the harbor need to be? What floor do you need to be on? All that kind of stuff. You're connecting the dots into a very complex system. And if other industries have already gone there, I can see it's clear as day it's going to come into the building industry. That's the only way to optimize what we're doing. And I think that's definitely a trend that I see. And then if you attach blockchain to these, you want to be able to track do an audit trail, for example, and see where it went wrong or who's responsible for that piece, then it's kind of endless.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. I know that what we as a nation and world went through recently with the pandemic, and it really exposed how things that happen in the supply chain can really affect not only our industry but all the industries that impact our life. And I live in the state of Florida, so we've gone through a hurricane a few years ago, and just the impact of a natural disaster like that and how it affected available labor, available materials was more than I ever imagined. And so I agree with you. There's really an opportunity here with having this data available to help inform decision makers, but also utilizing and harnessing technology to come to better solutions more rapidly is really a need for us in the building industry, from supply chain to resilience and sustainability and recovery from a natural disaster to building better buildings and building more with less resources. Great,
Absolutely.
great perspective, Kimon. I'm going to transition to one of my favorite parts of our podcast, a little bonus question we always like to ask our guests when we can. Tell us a little interesting fact about yourself, something folks probably wouldn't see on your LinkedIn profile or your resume. Tell us something interesting, little known fact about you you'd like to share.
Outside of AI and BIM, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it's my name, actually. My first name is Kimon, which is Greek, and Onuma is my last name, which is Japanese. My mother's Greek American, my father's Japanese American. I was born in in Athens, lived in Rome, spoke Greek, Italian, Japanese, English. So I'm just all mixed up. And my parents, and that's been a good experience. Actually, looking back, it's been a great experience because it's taught me to kind of flip hats quickly, right? On the fly. That's been my background.
Well, that's amazing. I mean, I've known you a long time. I didn't know that. Thank you for sharing that. That is fantastic. It does speak to how you are so agile and versatile in so many ways. So what's next for you? What's on the horizon you're excited about?
We're always experimenting. We're excited about the work we're doing with NIBS. There's a lot of really complex things going on, and the collaboration aspect, both on the standards and the digital twin development side and the actual projects like the State Department. We're doing quite a bit more with BIMStorm, especially we've layered in AI into it in the last year with BIMStorms now. So there's going to be one in a couple of weeks. We're actually even focusing on a project that the UN is interested in for landscaping and trees. We're treating trees as assets. It's basically how do you look at trees in urban environments and how does that affect a lot of things. So we're kind of branching out to a lot of things. Part of our challenge is we're branching all over the place. We have to constantly be reined in. Even in our business, we like to experiment. If we're experimenting too much, then we kind of go off the rails sometimes. But that's what we do.
No, it's great to have innovators like you in the industry that helps have a vision for the future and help us to reach it. So for our audience, just to recap a few really important ideas, decoupled data is important, being able to move that data, without it being constrained to an application. I love the data as a Lego analogy. I think it resonates with so many people. And the need for open standards and open data, being able to transport that data from one application to another or reference it with ease, and how those connect to AI. Thank you so much for your insight, and appreciate what you're doing with BIMStorms, how those can be turned around really quickly, and the very collaborative approach and the output that comes from that. I do like, one of my bigger takeaways from talking with you is just this idea of AI as an agent that can observe the data, provide feedback, complete a particular task. I think that's just a very interesting way of looking at, really the opportunity and the possibility with data. So any last thoughts that you'd like to share with our audience?
I'd really like to thank NIBS for being part of this over the years and helping me learn. I've learned a lot, and I still am learning, so it's one of the future-facing things too. So I really think it's important to be engaged with an organization like NIBS. We're going to continue that, definitely.
Yeah, man, we appreciate your contributions over the years and your engagement. Again, just a pleasure to know you and work with you. Just want to thank you for joining us today, and thank our audience. Thank you for tuning in to Building Innovation Podcast. I want to thank Kimon Onuma again for joining us and sharing his expertise. If you'd like to subscribe to the Building Innovation, you can do so with whatever podcast mechanism of choice, and be sure to check out the NIBS YouTube channel for more great content. If you enjoy the podcast, please like and share the episode, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.
You've been listening to Building Innovation, the podcast, the official podcast of the National Institute of Building Sciences. For more information, visit our website at nibs.org.